Okay, if I can have everyone's attention, we'll go ahead and get started with our meeting.
American Idol. It should have been American Idol.
I'm going to ask David Melhoff,
and you would have pulled
and he would lead us in prayer.
to go to Republican.
And Captain David Swofford, United States Navy retired, lead us in the pledge of allegiance. So if everyone could please stand. And David Melhoff, if you would, please.
Father, we're the receivers of your grace and your mercy, and we understand, and God, we know that you created this day for your purpose. Help us to see, Father, what it is that you're doing from your perspective. God, as far as this nation is concerned, we are a nation without sense. There's no discernment in us. If only, God, we were wise and would understand this and discern what our end would be. Father, we'd be able to see what's going on from your perspective. Help us, God, equip us, sustain us, as we as patriots stand firm for biblical principles to restore this nation. God bless us with the wisdom we need, the discernment we need to better understand how it is that we can combat these forces of evil. Equip us, we pray. Thanks for being with us today in this place. Bless the food and nourishment of our bodies in this time, God. Watch down upon us with your favor, we pray. And help us, God, not only to be attentive, but to be obedient to that still small voice behind us that says, this is the way, walk in it. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Salute. Pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of these United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, if I can get my speakers up here to the front table, please. With the exception of you, Ralph. We don't have room for you right now, but we'll be bringing you up here. We're going to have a number of speakers here today. I had put in the email that Insurance Commissioner John Doak would be our speaker. He called me yesterday, and it was really important that he not come and be our speaker today, even though he initially requested to do so. And it was a really important thing. He was always intending to bring with him Dr. Farmer here. And Randy was going to be here also. So we're still going to be able to get the message that John wanted us to hear. And I'm really happy that Ralph Bullard returned my phone call and is going to do the information about Thanksgiving, and you're really going to be in for a real treat there. We do have one thing I found out today that disappoints me, but they'll soon be closing this restaurant. So we're going to have to find another place to have our luncheons. Over the years, we've met at a number of places, and for a variety of reasons, we have changed. Oftentimes, or sometimes, it's because restaurants go out of business, i.e. the Golden Corral. We were there for about 5 years. Sometimes the food was just intolerable. Sometimes we've outgrown them. That's been one of the real problems. And it is a real issue because there are not many restaurants that have a private room that will seat over about 80. And we sometimes bump up close to 150 here. So the most likely place that we'll be moving to, and it was one I always considered moving to, even from here, because when you get to where you're filling the restaurant almost every week, then it inhibits further growth because the people think it's too crowded, you know, and you start losing people. But the Character Inn, downtown Oklahoma City, will hold many more. They actually have 2 different rooms. One will hold about 285 at full capacity. I don't like the location of it, and I've not pulled the trigger there because of all the work that they've been doing down there. However, they kind of have that area right around the Character Inn finished now. And so we'll have to talk to them. But if you know of a place, go ahead and let me know about it. It does not work well to order off of a menu. And the reason being is we've done that in the past. And you'll be, all the folks here at this table will be sitting here, and the waitress will come and take your orders. And by the time she brings the food back, you've gotten up to go visit one of your friends over here. And the payment, it just doesn't work well. Some type of a buffet or modified buffet is almost a necessity. And again, the seating arrangement is important too. So Anyway, they've been very good to us here. We've been here for over 3 years, and we're going to miss it. It's a good location to the Capitol and such as that. But, you know, he's just never been able to develop an evening business, and with the opening of Gabriella's around here, I think that's probably hurt a little too. And so, but our first speaker today, and I'm very happy to have him with us again. He's probably been to more OCPAC meetings than most of our members have. But one of our close friends and a gentleman that many of us worked very hard for in the gubernatorial race 2 years ago. 4.5 percentage points kept us from going into a runoff. And I believe in a runoff, we probably would have prevailed with that. And there would be a lot of things that Randy Brogdon would have done perhaps a little different than Governor Fallon. However, I'm very thankful to Governor Fallon for her courage in saying no to the expansion of Medicaid and no to these healthcare insurance exchanges. And I'm going to tell you something. Particularly on the Medicaid expansion, which there are a lot of forces, powerful forces in this state that were pushing her toward that. But in that Medicaid expansion, the states that got on board can never back out now. And you're going to see down the road, 5, 6, 8, and 10 years from now, what a huge mistake that was as they try to come up with funding for that Medicaid expansion. So, but anyway, please welcome all the way from Owasso, Oklahoma, former state senator and gubernatorial candidate Randy Brogdon. Randy.
Thank you, Uncle Charlie. I love OCPAC, and I will never forget the first time I met Charlie Meadows. It was in Claremore, Oklahoma. I was running for the state senate. This is back in 2000, I guess, or 2000. Yeah, it is back in 2000. And never heard of OCPAC, never heard of Charlie Meadows, and I spoke at a gathering with several other politicians and trying to get my message out and to get some support. And up comes this guy. I think he might have even had a sport coat on that.
Yeah. Out of uniform.
Out of uniform. And he introduced himself to me. He said, "Hey, I like a lot of what I heard tonight out of you, and I would like for you to come speak to our group." And I said, "Sure. When and where?" And he said, "The good news is, if you convince our group that you're worthy of our vote, we can give you some money, you know, $500 or $1,000. So I connected very quickly with that because, as you might already know, I was probably underfunded at the time. But that started my relationship with Charlie. I soon met his wife, Linda, back here. And throughout the last decade, we have spent a lot of time together. Charlie has invited Don and I to be his guests in their home many, many times. And we took advantage of that, especially on the campaign trail. Don and I would be flying through from one side of the state to the other, and Charlie would just leave the light on for me, kind of like the Motel 6. He gave me a key to the house, and I could slip in and get a good night's sleep, and Linda would usually get up and make me breakfast the next morning. So I certainly appreciate Charlie and Linda, their friendship, their concern for our country. I told my cousin Mike on the way over here, I said, Charlie is an amazing individual. The things that he does for liberty, the things that he does for trying to promote the cause of liberty that every one of us are concerned about. But that's not what I came to talk about today. I forgot why I was here. I get in front of OCPAC and a little chatty Cathy. But Commissioner Doak called me Monday, and I was planning on taking off today, for the holidays. And Commissioner Doak said, "Could you go to Oklahoma City for me?" Because he had something else that came up and he couldn't come. And so Mississippi said, "No, I'm going to take a vacation day." I said, "Yes, I'd be happy to." And coming to OCPAC is always a pleasure. But I want to parrot what Charlie said. I'm extremely happy that Governor Fallon took the stand that she did. And I read her press release. Yeah. I read her press release, and she even made the comment about the exchange, the burden that would put on the citizens of this state. But she also mentioned the Medicaid money. And I think any of us in here can recognize the fact that in the out years, as soon as the feds quit giving that free money to the state of Oklahoma, it would have a financial, put a financial burden on the state like we have never seen before. And so Governor Fallon made a very wise decision. I'm extremely happy with that. And today, Rick Farmer is going to kind of go into detail about her decision, and in particular about Commissioner Doak's stand. We have had many conversations about this over the last 2 years, and Rick has been in all of those decision-making meetings, and I'm going to introduce Dr. Farmer here in just a second. But before I do, I brought another fellow with me, Kevin Stoneking. Kevin, if you wouldn't mind just standing waving. For those of you that don't know, Commissioner Doak, several months ago, took it upon a rather intense challenge to, and this is what I'm in charge of now. I go around the state working with fire districts all over the state of Oklahoma, 1,600 of those, to help them improve their ISO rating, which has a direct impact on the homeowner's insurance. The better the rating, the lower the insurance. Unfortunately, out of the 1,600 fire companies in this state, 52% of those have the worst rating of a 9 or a 10. 1's the best, a 10's the worst. So 52% of those have terrible ratings. So we have hired Kevin Stoneking, Major Kevin Stoneking. He was just retired from the Oklahoma City Fire Department, a 27-year veteran, and he had just successfully taken Oklahoma City through their ISO re-rating and took their outlying non-hydrogen areas from a 9, which is not good, all the way down to a 5, which is amazing. He was instrumental in that. So we stole him from the Oklahoma City Fire Department. He's very instrumental now in working directly with those companies and making improvements around the state. But let me just introduce Dr. Farmer real quick. Dr. Farmer is the smart one of our whole bunch. I think he is the only one that has a doctorate degree. He's from a pretty part of the state, Tahlequah, Oklahoma. He's a published author. He's done all kinds of things that he's done throughout his years. He has, more recently, before he came to work for Commissioner Doak, was working with the House staff, helping them with their legislation, a policy writer. So he's been instrumental in moving the conservative message in the right direction over the last several years. He now works directly with Commissioner Doak in our department. He is a valuable asset, and with that said, I'd like to introduce to this group Dr. Rick Farmer.
Well, don't anybody have a heart attack, because I'm not that kind of doctor. And I am living proof that you don't have to be smart to have a PhD, but you do have to work really hard. And I suspect there's some folks here that know what hard work is all about. It's good to be with you. Thank you for inviting me, Charlie. Thanks for letting me come and step in for the commissioner. A few familiar faces around here, and a whole lot more friendly faces. So thank you. It's good to be here. Good to be with you. The commissioner issued a press release. The governor made her announcement on Friday about noon, and the commissioner put out a press release after that, later that day, and then he called Charlie and said, hey, I'd like to come over and talk about it. And so that's kind of how we got here. The commissioner's press release it's back there on that table. We made several copies in this land back there, so if anybody'd like to pick that up on your way out, or if you'd like to grab one now, go for it. But you're welcome to have that. Basically, he wanted to come and spend just a few minutes talking to you about his position in relation to the governor's position and the press release that he put out. Commissioner Doak believes that Obamacare is a violation of our individual liberty. He's made that very clear from the beginning. He sees it as an infringement of Oklahoma's sovereignty. And that's a really big deal. And if that's not enough, it's a budget buster. It's going to cause the federal budget to explode, and it's going to cause Oklahoma's budget to crater. And that's 3 really good reasons right there to be opposed to it. Oklahomans were strongly opposed to it in 2010 when we passed the state question, 756. And the governor's office reported in her press release that she had gotten thousands of calls in the last few days saying that people opposed it and they did not want her to do a state-based exchange. Our press release says that the department has received thousands of calls, probably the same people. Charlie didn't call us 1,000 times. Well, anyway, maybe they called the governor's office and they hung up and they called us. I don't know, but both of us got thousands of calls in the last few weeks indicating that people are not in favor of this and they wanted state government to stand up to the federal government. And that's what Commissioner Doak supports, and that's what the governor did, thankfully. Commissioner Doak says in his press release that he fully supports the governor's decision not to create a state-based exchange. There's another piece going on here, and that's the Attorney General's lawsuit. The Attorney General filed a lawsuit a few months ago that attacks the one chink in the armor that still remains with Obamacare, and that is that when they wrote the law, they wrote it very narrowly to say that these subsidies that they're going to give away would be given away through a state insurance exchange. Well, if there's no state insurance exchange, how are they going to give these subsidies away? And that's what the Attorney General has sued about. And the Commissioner thinks that that's such a strong argument that he intends to file a brief in court joining that lawsuit, saying that he agrees with that lawsuit and supports that lawsuit. The Cato Institute has highlighted that lawsuit because it is basically the best current argument against Obamacare. There's a lot of arguments out there, but this is the one that's the most viable at the moment. And the Cato Institute has highlighted that, comes from our state's Attorney General, and the Commissioner fully supports that idea, wants to join forces with it. Also, this legislative session, we've been spending the last month or so trying to figure out what is going to be the legislative agenda for the Oklahoma Insurance Department. And one of the ideas that we're planning to put forward has to do with religious freedom. And so, you know, one of the things that Obamacare, or at least the rules that have been written about Obamacare, one of the things that they've done is they have attacked people's religious freedom. There's the Hobby Lobby lawsuit. There's the things that were going on with the Catholic bishops. Well, we are going to propose legislation in Oklahoma that emphasizes Oklahoma's religious freedom, which will basically be back in your face against Obamacare. So you can watch for that to come out. I do think, though, that leaves us with a question. Okay, Obamacare is designed to solve a problem, and you're not for that, so what are you for? What do you want to do to solve this problem? And we pursued several different ideas. Let me just tell you about 3 of them really quickly. The first one is something called associational health plans. And this is for employers. It's a different way to pool the risk for small employers so they can buy group health insurance for their employees at a lower rate. So that's good for the employers, it's good for the employees. It's totally a free market system. It's called an associational health plan. That passed last year. It was Senate Bill 1621. If you're a member of an association, I don't know, is there an air conditioning association? If you're a member of the air conditioning association, and the air conditioning association decided that they wanted to put a plan together like that, then everybody who's a member of that association would be able to buy into it. That's basically how it works. So if you're a small business person and you're a member of an association, you might talk to your association about trying to put a deal together like that would benefit you. Here's a second idea that the commissioners talked about a lot. And this idea actually comes from the American Legislative Exchange Council, that conservative group of legislators at ALEC. And that has to do with compacting to sell insurance across state lines. So if you're in Oklahoma and you can see that there's cheaper insurance in Kansas, but you're saying, why can't I buy that insurance? Well, because it's against the law, that's why. If we could get this compacting bill done, then there would be an opportunity for our insurance commissioner to agree with their insurance commissioner that we'll sell their products and they'll sell our products, and that would be lower rates for people in Oklahoma if there's a lower rate in wherever it is we're compacting with. And so that's an important idea. That idea has been floating around the Capitol for a couple of years. In fact, it passed the legislature and got vetoed by Governor Henry. So maybe we can get it passed next time around, then we'll have a governor that would sign it. Here's a third idea, and it's related, and that is that part of what drives up the cost of health insurance is all these mandates. The state law says that an insurance policy has to cover all this stuff. And by the way, Obamacare increases the number of things that have to be covered. Well, state law already said it's 19 or 21, or there's some large amount of things that have to be in an insurance policy. If we could reduce the number of mandates in an insurance policy, we could reduce the cost of that policy. So there might be some things it wouldn't cover, but it would be cheaper, and people would be able to afford it. And it would help people that are struggling to buy insurance to be able to afford it at a lower rate. Well, it turns out that Oklahoma law already permits that for people under the age of 40. So a really simple tweak in the law would be to delete those words under the age of 40. All we have to do to make that change. Now, you know, I'm certain that the proponents of these mandates will fight that tooth and nail. They'll see it coming. They'll know what it's all about. But you don't have to draft a huge big law. You just need to go in there and delete the words under the age of 40. That's the only tweak that's required to make that happen. So, our point here is there are solutions. There are market-based solutions. There are solutions in Oklahoma that are being pursued at the legislature already. And we don't need Obamacare, and the commissioner is staunchly opposed to it. Thanks.
Okay. You know, there's another option here too, and in Obamacare's bill, faith-based health sharing cost organizations are exempted. And as soon as I get the chance, I'm going to try to talk with David and Barbara Green about that as an alternative. Now, they're appealing their lawsuit, and I'm glad that they are. But if they eventually lose that, I think you'll find most of their employees are Christians, and they could actually help them make that very affordable. About the most you're going to be paying is $350 a month. That's for a family of 10. You know, or less.
Let me just say something about that really quickly. The commissioner strongly supports these faith-based ideas. Now, it's important for people to understand that they're not buying insurance.
That's right.
And that the insurance commissioner doesn't regulate these things.
That's right.
But he strongly supports them. He did a news interview in Tulsa about this. He's written a couple of columns about this. He wrote a letter to the National Association of Faith-Based, I don't exactly know what they're called, but there is a National Association of these faith-based plans. And he wrote a letter of endorsement that he sent to the president and the executive director of that association. So he strongly supports those ideas.
And you know, we actually had, and Randy attended that meeting, we actually had the vice president of Samaritan Ministries in charge of their development here about a year and a half ago as one of our speakers. And actually had him speak 3 times and once on radio, and every single place had him speak. We had people there that had been a member for some period of time to give testimonies. My wife and I have been a member since March, or the end of March, and we are thrilled with it. So, okay, one quick thing before we move to our next speaker here is I have obtained some new materials here that I want to share with you. This is a classic. It's The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, and have it available for a recommended contribution of $8 here. This is probably pretty much the foundation of economics, and particularly free trade. But what he will do in here is define what free trade is and what it's not, and the exceptions to free trade, much of which our modern day free traders don't ever mention. And then another one, how many of you have ever read the Federalist Papers? Let me see your hand. How many have enjoyed that nice light reading? Dr. John Ides, no. constitutional attorney one time said, because he would always assign to his law students to read the Federalist Papers, and invariably they would come up to him and say, "Dr. Eismo, these are hard to understand." And he slapped his forehead and said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you. I forget, you've been dumbed down by 12 years of government education, an undergraduate degree, and now you're in law school, and you just don't understand who these were written for. These were written to be understood by some very sophisticated upstate New York farmers. And you're at a real disadvantage." Anyway, a very bright young man spent about a year and a half on the Federalist Papers, actually rewriting them in modern language in an understandable format. And he went to Glenn Beck, and Glenn Beck was very impressed with him. He got some constitutional attorneys and historians to read through what this man had written to make sure he was not revising the history of the Federalist Papers. And so he has published, Glenn Beck, the original argument, the Federalist Papers. Now, John just brought these this morning, just a few of them. We've got 20 on order. They're all used. We're to get them at as cheap a price as possible. We're ordering them. John's doing this. Thank you, John. But anyway, he started reading it last night. He says it's really, really good. Only thing I'm disappointed is not all of them are translated, just some of them. I guess the key ones. But very easily readable, and I have them over here. Again, a recommended contribution of $8. And then Thomas Paine's Common Sense, recommended donation of $3. So those are some new things. Another thing, too, we have here is this fictional debate between James Madison and Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry was a leader of the Anti-Federalist, and Madison was a leader of the Federalist. And, you know, it was about a 2.5, 3-year process to get the ratification done on our Constitution and to develop the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. And it was a very difficult struggle. And so this is a fictionalized debate as to what the different ideas are. And I hate to say it, but the Anti-Federalists were probably right. They saw some things, some flaws in the Constitution particularly, that would eventually lead to the kind of government that we have today. Now, once you adopted the Bill of Rights, if we'd have lived by the Constitution and Bill of Rights, we'd have probably been okay. But we didn't. And so, anyway, those are some interesting items. And then last week I ran out of the DVD, the one on the corner here. And as I mentioned, one of our members contacted me and said, "Charlie, I was in military intelligence for a number of years." And he said, "I am very concerned with what I see going on in the Obama administration." He said, "It is so similar to what actually occurred in the old Soviet Union during that period of time. Once they came to power, they did certain things to consolidate their power." Well, that's what this DVD on the corner here is about, on tyranny, because what happened when Obama was first elected, he began to make moves to consolidate his power. And the parallel with what he has tried to do with what Adolf Hitler did is amazing. And that's what this DVD will show you. So all those recommended prices there on that, I urge you to accept these, to access these things, because education, proper education, is what drives away the enemies of the Constitution. And we need to really know what we're talking about. In regard to that, and I mentioned in the email the special one about contacting Governor Fallon, that when we had E.W. Shannon as the Speaker-elect now of the House, and Brian Bingman, President Pro Tem of the Senate here, when we had them here, during Senator Bingman's discussion, he indicated that we would have to develop our own exchange because of the supremacy clause in the United States Constitution. And some of our good friends, some of our good Ron Paul Banny roosters jumped in there to holler not on unconstitutional issues. And I had to call them down. They called them down twice. But then turned around and said exactly to them what they were going to say anyway. And this is one of the things that we need to understand, folks. We're a lot better off if we will influence and persuade people than just going around bragging about how I got a zinger in, or I was right and they were wrong, or something of that nature. What we're trying to do is make Oklahoma an exceptional state, and you do that with proper understanding. And so one of the things that I expressed to both of these two gentlemen is that the Supremacy Clause actually applies to the 17 enumerated powers in the Constitution of the United States, and it doesn't apply to those things outside of that. And that's what we're trying to get people to understand, that we don't have to go along with those things that are outside of that. And we urge these two leaders to provide the kind of leadership to push back against the federal government every way they possibly can, in every situation they can. You know, Scott Pruitt, our Attorney General, promised he would do this, and he followed through with that. As soon as he was elected, he actually set up a special section in the AG's office, and he hired a top constitutional attorney to examine every edict that comes down from the federal government, and if they're unconstitutional, he wants to stand up and sue, fight, or whatever. And we need that, and we stand behind him. But the AG's office and the courts are not the only way you can do that. The legislature not only has the opportunity, but a responsibility to stand up to the overreach of the federal government and to help put them back into their proper cage of responsibilities. And we urge these men to understand that and told them, we'll stand behind you in your leadership. Ferland actually was, he studied this issue, did a paper on this issue some years ago, and he speaks on the issue of this. So I asked him, would you come? Or he asked if he could come, and I said, sure. He said, I can in 5 minutes do this. We're going to give him 10, okay? Maybe. But I asked him also to, on one sheet of paper, basically put this down, because I'm going to tell you, 8 or 9 out of 10 of the lawmakers down here don't have a clue of this information. So if you can put this down on one piece of paper, then we want to send this information to all of these lawmakers down here to help put a little bit of metal in their backbone and to help them understand they can and they should. It's a responsibility to stand up to the federal government. So he did one page, and then he added another page too that doesn't have to go with it. But anyway, please welcome Ferland here as he comes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, Charlie. Randy, good to see you. Good to be here. I was just watching Glenn Beck the other day, and he was talking about how these kind of organizations right here are much more important than they've ever been with the recent lawsuit. You know, in November, we've got to do what we can at the local level and the school boards and the cities, and so these kinds of things are more important than ever. I was talking to my wife here the other day about this stuff, and did everybody get a copy of this?
No. But they can get it on the way.
Well, it probably would be all right if Molly passed them around, because they'll follow along a little bit. Molly, would you pass these around? I was talking to my wife the other day about this. This was a couple of weeks ago about Obamacare and how we got in front of the Supreme Court. And what happened there is we had, as individuals, citizens of the state, we had the government trying to protect us from the government. And as a result, they failed. We had 26 states go in front of the United States Supreme Court. And with all the accumulated resources of 26 states, they go in front of the United States Supreme Court, and they hang their whole case essentially on one issue for the individuals. Now, they had the Medicaid issues and some issues for the states, but in respect to individuals, they hung their whole case on one issue. And when they lost that issue, we lost this thing. It was a failure. And in private practice, that would be malpractice. I'm a car dealer, I'm in the finance business, and I was looking at a case the other day, about 6 weeks ago, and it had been appealed out to the state Supreme Court. And Title 20, or Title 12, 12A stuff, UCC, and Title 42, some contract stuff. And this case went out there, and what you do if you lose a case in court, you appeal it, you file this thing called a petition in error. And you list propositions of error on there. What went wrong? Why am I appealing? And on this little banking case in the state of Oklahoma, that the Supreme Court had 27 propositions of error. That's what lawyers in private practice do. If you're paying a lawyer to represent you, if they think there might even be one thing wrong, they appeal that. Well, when we get this Obamacare that's 2,800 pages, and we've got 26 states, and we've got 2,800 pages, and they hang their hat on one issue. And when we lost the whole deal. And that's what I told my wife. That's what happens when you rely on the state to protect you from the federal government. Well, Charlie sent this email out the other day, and I looked at it, and about Mr. Bingham talking about if we don't do this, they're going to do it for us, and we're going to be stuck with what they give us. And that's just not the case. And we're going to get to that in a second. But Charlie asked me if I'd seen the video where he was talking, and I hadn't, so I went home and looked at it. And I'm listening to this, and I'm watching what Mary Fallon's coming out of the governor's mansion and different things, and I'm watching that, and I'm thinking, my God, we're getting ready to do it again. We're getting ready to rely on the government to protect us from the government, and if we do that, we're going to lose again. We've got to participate in this thing. Like Charlie just said, we've got to be active citizens. Not sit on the back row and throw bombs at our legislature, but we've got to create relationships with these people. I'm not here to disparage anybody that's at the state level trying to assist on this thing. Mary Fallon or any of them. I've got a lot of friends that are lawyers, and they're respected lawyers. They're very good at what they do. I don't have one friend that specializes in states' rights. That's just not a real popular form of law to practice. There ain't no money in it either, right? So I don't, you know, I'm sure Mr. Bingham, if he's an oil and gas guy, if I wanted a consultant on that, I'd call him and he'd be my guy. But on this states' rights stuff, you and me need to get involved. We need to build these relationships with these people where we can talk to them and explain our concern. And with my state rep, I believe I have that. I think everybody in this room needs to have that working relationship with their rep. So what we've got here, and Randy, this is interesting because I really supported you on your campaign. You know that. You were the guy running around championing states' rights and the 10th Amendment, Article 1, Section 8, and all that stuff. And you know, you run around with the Constitution in his pocket. He was always pulling it out and saying, where does it say that in the Constitution? So that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. But I've got a couple of cases here, and Charlie made me condense 2 Supreme Court cases into 1 page.
Good job, good job.
Pretty tough to do. But at the top of this first page, it says Article 6, the Supremacy Clause, and it says this Constitution, and that means we're talking about the United States Constitution, and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof. I underlined that. And the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof. That's those people that are in the back room that Charlie was talking about. The laws that they pass must be in pursuance to the Constitution. Well, what does that mean? Well, that's what this other page is that's got Article 1, Section 8 on it. The specific powers of the United States Congress. If it's not on this sheet of paper, the Congress does not have the power to enact it. Well, when they went to the Constitutional Convention in 1787, they went in there in May, and the Congress had absolutely 0 powers. They didn't have any. And those 55 or 56 people got together. I can't even remember how many people died. 55.
Well, that's not the time.
Okay. They got together and they started giving them powers one by one. And they said, okay, you've got the power to borrow money. You've got the power to regulate commerce. You've got the power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. So they went through that line by line, and they specifically told the United States Congress what powers they would have. And at the time, everybody just assumed if it wasn't on this piece of paper that Congress didn't have it. They started out with that many, 0. And they ended up with this many. And everybody just assumed that they knew that if it was not on this sheet of paper, they didn't have the power to do it. Well, some of the people, like you were talking about, were still skeptical. So they said, wait a minute, we want insurance. So at the bottom, they put that 10th Amendment in there. And it says, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And scholars of the day call it a tritology. I had to look it up. They said that that 10th Amendment was redundant. We didn't need it. That everybody knew that if it wasn't Article 1, Section 8, that everybody would just always know that they didn't have the power to do it. Right. It's a good thing they put it in there, right? So they put it in there. So that's what we're talking about. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. And at the time, when they run around trying to ratify this in 1787, most everybody at the time knew if it wasn't on this piece of paper that was reserved to the states. Well, as time goes on, and we get farther and farther away from 1787, people, they don't understand this. And they start trying to pass laws that take away from this. So we've got to push back, and that's where the Supreme Court comes in. And that's the two cases that I've listed on this piece of paper. The first one is this New York versus the United States. And the statutory reference is on there if you ever want to look it up. But essentially what that New York versus United States did, radioactive waste was becoming a problem. And I know I've got friends, and they say, what's radioactive waste? It has to do with health care. No. It has to do with the federal government's ability to order a state to do something. That's the issue here. So let's know that. But what happened is the federal government told these states that they were going to have to do something with the waste that was being created within their borders. And if they didn't create legislation that dealt with that radioactive waste, they were actually going to have to take title to the waste. They were going to have to become responsible for the waste and do something with it. Well, New York pushed back and they said, no, you don't have the authority to tell us that we have to do anything. You can't tell us we have to enact certain legislation, kind of like this health care exchange. You can't tell our legislature we have to enact legislation, and you can't tell us it's our responsibility to deal with waste created by private industry. And guess what? The Supreme Court agreed. Their argument was this statute imposed unconditional affirmative obligations on the state. The acts compel states' action without their consent. And the Supreme Court agreed. It's like the federal government can tell the state of Oklahoma, you can't drill oil out in the middle of Hefner Lake for whatever reason. But they can't tell the state of Oklahoma, you must go out there in the middle of that lake and drill for oil. There's a difference there. And what the court ruled says this case concerns the circumstances under which Congress may use the states as implements of regulation. That is, whether Congress may direct or otherwise motivate the states to regulate in a particular field or a particular way. And there's a whole bunch of pages in between this. It said, and the ruling is, Congress may not simply commandeer the legislative process. And I like that word. They may not simply commandeer the legislative process of the states by directly compelling them to enact and enforce a federal regulatory program. While Congress has substantial power to govern the nation directly, the Constitution has never been understood to confer upon Congress the ability to require the states to govern according to Congress's instruction. We have always understood that even where Congress has the authority to pass laws requiring or prohibiting certain acts, it lacks the power directly to compel the states to require or prohibit those acts. So that's pretty clear. So then we go to the next case. Are we running? Okay, I'll go through this real quick. The next case, Prince, is where they're trying to tell the executive branch they must act. And what that was an expansion. It was the Brady Bill. It was the expansion of the Gun Control Act of 1968. And what they were doing, essentially, is if I go down here to Academy and I buy a gun, I've got to fill out this application, and they take that application down to Wetzel, and they're telling Wetzel, you have to run this background check and see if Furlan is okay to buy this gun or not. Well, the Sheriff Prince from Montana pushed back, and he said the federal government did not have the right to tell a state executive that they have to do anything, especially when it comes to enforcing a federal law. If the federal government wants to do these background checks, that's within their right, but they can't order the state to do these background checks. Once again, the Supreme Court agreed. It said, it is the whole object of this law to direct the functioning of the state executive, and hence to compromise the structural framework of dual sovereignty. It is the very principle of separate state sovereignty that such a law offends, and no comparative assessment of the various interests can overcome that fundamental defect. We expressly reject such an approach. We expressly rejected such an approach in New York. What he's saying is we just covered this 5 years ago, and we rejected it then. And then I underline it again. The federal government may not compel the states to enact or administer a federal regulatory program. Accordingly, the judgment of the Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit Court is reversed. So we've got two cases there. One, the federal government's trying to tell the state they have to enact legislation. The Supreme Court said that's unconstitutional. The second one said where the federal government's trying to tell state executives they must help enforce federal law or enact federal programs. The Supreme Court said that's unconstitutional. This healthcare exchange, they're trying to tell we got to do both. We've got to enact legislation and get the executive involved. So if they're unconstitutional individually, they have to be unconstitutional combined. And the point here, to your point, you were talking about, how much money this would cost, and some of the proponents of this were talking about this would create jobs. And all those arguments are beside the point. And that's what he said here. He said, and no comparative assessment of the various interests can overcome that fundamental defect. And that fundamental defect is an overreaching federal government. Doesn't matter if this is a good idea or not, it's overreaching and it's unconstitutional. I guess I'm done, huh?
Not only are you done, you did an excellent job. We're going to run a little late here today, but it's the day before Thanksgiving, and that's fine, I hope, anyway. I'd actually called Ralph last week to see if I could get him to come and talk about Thanksgiving a little bit, but he was out of town. He was back in Plymouth and Boston. Ralph is actually on the board of directors of the Plymouth Rock Foundation, and the school, Christian Heritage Academy, of which he was the headmaster for 30-some years, and his oldest son is in that position now, as a senior trip every year takes their seniors back to that area on what I call an American Heritage Tour. My wife and I were blessed and privileged to go there, I believe it was 5 years ago. And I can tell you that Ralph is a gentleman that has done a lot of first-generation research. He's not just listened to what historians say that other people say. He's actually read the writings of the actual people that made the history. And he fully understands that. Thanksgiving is absolutely my favorite holiday. And so please give Ralph your attention for about another 10 minutes or however long that it takes here. And Ralph, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Charlie. I caught something on the East Coast. That kind of stopped me up a little bit, but I'll be just fine talking. I did put a couple of handouts on this table over there. One is on Plymouth, the importance of the Pilgrims. The other is the importance of Jamestown in 1607. Both the Pilgrims in 1620. But both those colonies were used by God to establish the United States of America. So I encourage you to pick up a copy of both of them. Mr. Aaron Ferguson, our head of our history department, puts these things out periodically, and they're very, very good. The Plymouth Rock Foundation was established in 1970 at the time of the 350th anniversary of the landing of the Pilgrims in 1620. As a result of that celebration, 350-year celebration, a great patriot, a wealthy man, Mr. John Talcott, established the Plymouth Rock Foundation with the idea we have to restore the heritage, the history of the Pilgrims, because they are the important ingredient that define what America will become someday. Mr. Paul Jady, who is a schoolman and a pastor back in Plymouth, maybe one of the best Pilgrim historians alive today. You all who watch Glenn Beck, if you'll watch that tomorrow, he and David Barton are doing the Thanksgiving program. They filmed that yesterday in Dallas, Monday in Dallas. And you want to meet two really bright guys, Paul Jady and David Barton. They'll be doing that Thanksgiving time. Mr. Jady was, the state is planning to, the state of Massachusetts, to celebrate the 400-year celebration in 2020. And Mr. Jady was nominated to be put on that committee, and the powers to be didn't want him on that committee. They said he was afraid he'd turn into a religious occasion. Well, you can't stay the Pilgrims without knowing it's a religious occasion when they came to America and while they came to America. So finally they put him back on in a lesser role, but he's a very, very intelligent man. He is now the executive director of the fellowship of the Plymouth Rock Foundation. Okay, number one, two questions. Anybody know why the date November the 21st is an important historical date in America? November 21st, that's today, isn't it? Yes. Very important historical date. That's my birthday.
That's why I didn't buy
Well, there's a bigger bite than that. That's the day the Pilgrims landed at Provincetown in 1620. So the beginning in the new land took place in 1620. Had another question here for you that I thought would be important. Well, how come you'd say something like that? That one of the most important dates in history? Because the Pilgrims, God had built into them the principles of government, of family, and of church that will be the fundamental principles of the nation. Now, they didn't know that, but God had built that into them. I'm going to talk about two of those just in a minute. But the Pilgrims were, I call it an embryo. They were a seed, and they had been built into them all those principles that would become great characteristics of a nation one day. So the November the 21st is an important date for us to have. Next question. How many nations in the world have a national day of Thanksgiving?
10.
I believe America's the only nation that has a national day of celebration. Yes, sir.
My British friend said they have one on July 4th.
Well, that's great. It's two then. Well, the idea is, why was that so? Of course, the national day was not declared until years later. But they were a people who understood God, and they were grateful for what God did for them. And on all sorts of occasions, they would give thanks. And what we know about the first Thanksgiving in 1621 became kind of the famous one. So anyway, the Pilgrims are important. And two things about that importance. Number one is the writing the Mayflower Compact. There's a big story behind that, why it had to be written. It was written before they got off the ship there at Provincetown. And it has several clauses in it. One says it's for the glory of God, why they came. Number two, it's a covenant, a sacred commitment between the people and themselves and God. They were going to do this. The other one was that they were going to make their own laws. Now, this was new in the history of the world. the higher powers made laws, not the common people. And they said, we'll make our own laws. And here's the secret of the compact and the secret of America. That is that they said, we will make our own laws and we will obey the laws that we make. That was the principle of Christian self-government. Individual self-government applied to a civil body politic. And so the Mayflower Compact's a great, tremendous contribution to America. And the next one had to do with what happened to the Pilgrims when they got here. Things went bad, of course. And you know, the first winter, half of them died. That's kind of a discouraging blow. Most of the wives died the first year. And then the importance of the first year, when they went through that first winter, then they came into the next spring to get time for planting the corn. They planted, well, I'm kind of going black, actual number of the acres that they planted. I think they planted 26 acres of corn. And they had a communal system by contract with a company that financed the voyage to America. People that even financed this for financial advantages to themselves. There's an investment they made in the Pilgrims. And they said you will have a communal way of labor and a communal way of harvesting your goods. Everybody works, everybody gets, you know, make it equal division, all get the same. It didn't work very well. And then, so it had a very meager harvest that year, 1621. But they did have a Thanksgiving. That's the one that we hear about. It was not a big celebration. There wasn't a lot of food. Indians brought food by the deer and things. So the next year, they had a little more advantage. And now that they plant 60 acres of corn. Now they're weaker now than they were when they came, because they've been very hard living there on the East Coast. So now they get 60 acres of corn. Now Governor William Bradford, who's also the first American historian, he wrote the story of the Pilgrims called Us to the Plantation. In that document, he said that the Governor Bradford, talking about himself, he cut the knot that he could not untie. Now the knot that he could not untie was a communal way of living, or communism, or socialism, what you want to call it. And they all went into the fields, and they all were supposed to work equally, and they put all the food into a warehouse, and they divided out equally. But you know how people are. They don't all work just alike. And they started grumbling. The wives would grumble. They had to work in the fields all day and then take care of the house at night. Some of the men were hard laborers, and they worked extra hard and produced a lot of crop, and some men were kind of lazy, and they didn't, but they all got the same amount. And it wasn't productive doing that. And Bradford knew that. So he cut the knot he could not untie. He couldn't take that system, that agreement, and make it work. So he and the other leaders, talk about a very small group of people now. They just had 100 to start with and lost 50 of them the first year, so it's a small band. But they said this next season, 1623, whatever you grow yourself on land assigned to you is what you'll eat next year. If you don't grow very much, you don't eat very much. Those who work the hardest will eat the most. And they agreed they'd do it that way. There were a lot of single people there, and they put a single person with a family. They worked as a family. It said the wives who used to complain about going to the fields to work now went eagerly, because she knew what I produce is what I have to feed my family. The young people went to the fields and worked, knowing the same thing. The young men worked because they knew they just got what they worked for, not what other people worked for. You know what that established in America? That's free market, the free enterprise system. And it became traditional in America. What a tremendous blessing we have because of that. So in 1623, after the big harvest, they had a big Thanksgiving. That's where they had the abundant food on the table. 1621, they had the first Thanksgiving, but it was not an abundance of food. There was nothing about it. They said in 1622, Bradford records in his history, they had 4 ounces of corn per person per day. You've heard the poem, 5 kernels of corn, 5 kernels of corn, a feast of bread with 5 kernels of corn. Now the 5 kernels are supposed to equal 4 ounces, I don't know. It's the idea of a very small amount of food is all they had, but enough to keep them alive for 1 more year. So God used that tremendously. We have to restore the story of the Pilgrims. If we don't restore how the whole thing got started, we don't know how to fix it. And so to study them is to study American history and God's dealing with the great people who produced a great nation. So I encourage you, what influence you have, learn something about the Pilgrims, tell your kids about it, give thanks yourself, and God will bless us as a nation doing that.
For those of you that may not know this, Ralph really believes in the principle of going forth and being fruitful and populating the earth. Ralph and his beautiful wife, Starley, had 10 children of their own. And the last I heard, and maybe I'll get an update here, the last I heard you have 54 grandchildren. What is the number now?
Oh, they're pooping out. We got 55.
55. I asked Ralph one time, how do you remember all their names? He says, I have to work at it. You know, so. Okay, folks, thank you so much for coming today. And we do have membership forms over here on the table. If you would like to join OCPAC, you may do so now for next year. And anybody joining now to do that next year. We'll be back here next week. Next week may be our last Wednesday here. I'll be happy to come up with another restaurant to go to as they're closing here. So, thank you so much for coming.